At a time when governments spend billions on reducing the amount of carbon that goes into the atmosphere, two organisations are still pumping it out. Thanks to their policies on controlled burning, the RSPB and the National Trust are causing more, not less, of the climate change they say they're committed to stopping. The reason? They don't burn small strips of uplands to create firebreaks and reduce fuel load. One fire at Saddleworth Moor, parts of which are managed by the RSPB, which burned for more than 3 weeks, released the same amount of carbon as 100,000 cars for a year. Another at nearby Winter Hill released 90,000 tonnes of carbon equivalent.
The stats clearly show that every year we have more wildfires than the year before, and that's a trend that's pretty much happening across the globe. Now that can be linked to climate change and extreme temperatures and droughts, and of course last year was an extreme summer. But by the early part of the summer, we'd broken the fire stats from the year before. Now, if you look at the 2018 Saddleworth Moor fire, rather than just looking about the devastation that was caused above ground to the key species or to the landscape, if we look below ground, the amount of carbon released in just under a week was the equivalent annual use of 100,000 family cars. That's how much carbon went up into the atmosphere. And we know that that fire sent up particulate into the air that impacted the air quality for around 4.5 million people.
The Met Office predicts the number of wildfires in the UK will continue to rise. Mere burning is one of the essential tools gamekeepers and landowners can use to combat the crisis, but the RSPB wants to ban it. Controlled fires work for wildlife as they can create fire breaks and allow regeneration of plant life.
If we ever had a situation where muirburn was going to be banned on peatland habitats wholesale, I mean, it would be an egregious act of self-harm, to be frank. You know, these habitats are extremely carbon rich. It's vitally important that we protect them and we make the habitat resilient as possible. So I think, you know, any notion that we're going to see a outright prohibition of muirburn on peatland habitats would be completely self-destructive, and I don't think it's something that we're going to see. And I would really caution anyone advocating that sort of approach.
Particularly with climate change, the drier, hotter summers we're experiencing. And if we don't manage vegetation, then the fire risk from wildfires is considerably greater. And compared to the controlled muir burn that's carried out by keepers and other land managers, wildfires burn down into the peat, into the ground, and cause considerable damage. Muir burn, which is cool, controlled, done under very strict conditions. You do not want it getting out of control. You do not want it to burn down into the peat. That does not cause the same damage.
BASC is warning of disastrous consequences for moorland landscapes unless the RSPB reassesses its position on managed moorland burning.
What we'd like to see is that the RSPB are a little bit more open with statistics, that they're honest with the differences between prescribed burning on shallow and deep peat, and also the need for prescribed burning at certain times. The aftermath of wildfires can be absolutely devastating. It can take tens of hundreds of years for the recovery of that peatland.
Despite the damage their policies cause to climate change and to upland wildlife, organisations such as the RSPB and the National Trust have the ear of the government. The Scottish Government is considering licensing muir burning.
One statistic that I always kind of come back to is something that the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, came out with, which was that over the 6 days that the Forcenard wildfire burnt, Scotland's carbon emissions were estimated to have doubled just from that one incident. Now, if we see, you know, wholesale incidents like that happening on a fairly regular basis, our carbon emissions are going to be through the roof. And frankly, that's not something that we can afford to do in a country that's got ambitious climate change targets, and rightly so. But if we are kind of undermining ourselves by failing failing to protect peatland habitats that store vast quantities of carbon, then we really are going to be shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to meeting these important targets, which ultimately we as a society in the UK, but also on a global scale, all depend on. So it's really, really important that we adequately protect these habitats, and fundamentally it's all about resilience, making these habitats resilient to wildfire risk.
We are seeing an impact of climate change. The fire behaviour that we're experiencing when we get wildfires is of a higher intensity than we've seen before, and all of this is coming together to give us some concern. So muirburn is absolutely an essential part to preventing wildfire and is not the main cause of wildfires in Scotland.
In England, government figures say there are 30,000 wildfires a year, which burn around 6,600 hectares of land in the countryside every year.
By not allowing muirburn, you would be increasing the vegetation, the height of vegetation, the fire risk on vast tracts of land. With climate change, the warmer, drier summers, that becomes a far greater fire risk. A wildfire which will burn down into the peat, cause considerable damage, not just to the ground, but also to wildlife. The risk is going to get greater.
Both fire brigades and scientists support the idea of controlled burning. The North Wales Fire Service released a video last year about how to conduct a controlled burn, though it criticised landowners for the large numbers of controlled burns that they either start without notifying their local fire brigade or burn out of control. A recent report by the University of York on the management of heather on moorlands concluded that burning absorbed twice as much carbon as mowing over a 10-year period, thanks to new growth, which is at odds with the RSPB's claim that it's adding to the climate crisis.
Well, the RSPB is wanting a ban of all burning, and I personally think that is pretty irresponsible, given the risk, which they're well aware of wildfires, the fact that controlled burning, muirburn, or indeed cutting can actually reduce that risk. And let's face it, if you have a wildfire, that is a considerable damage, not just to the environment, but to wildlife as well, and actually to people's livelihoods and safety. So anything we can do to reduce the frequency or risk of those wildfires, we need to do.
In Wales, a wildfire devastated a mountain in Snowdonia. Farmer Gareth Wynne-Jones says it could take years to recover.
Just going up there that night and seeing the devastation and the power of that fire just gave me a little bit of a sense like, yeah, we have to protect these mountains. We have to make sure that we're grazing them in the right places, and there is not undergrazing, because undergrazing can be more of a problem than overgrazing, especially with the fires. And we need to be looking at ways we can, do a cut-off so we can have fire breaks. We need to be looking at how we can source money to do that, because, if you lose habitats, you could lose vast habitats, and I mean thousands of acres.
Gamekeepers and land managers know that controlled fires reduce the risk of wildfires, like the one that devastated Saddleworth Moor. If they lose that vital tool, they warn the intensity and spread of wildfires on moors could get worse.
You need to recognise that Scotland has got a warming climate, the wildfire risk is increasing, and we absolutely need now more than ever every single method of vegetation control at our disposal so that we can appropriately and decisively tackle wildfire risk in Scotland.
Thousands of years of carbon can be gone in the blink of an eye when we are fighting climate change, and we desperately need to keep this carbon stored in the ground. So yes, I think that the RSPB and other organisations should be far more open about the uses of prescribed burning across the globe and the use of prescribed burning in this country.
Fieldsports groups say the RSPB needs to listen to scientists to protect the environment and reduce the carbon emissions from wildfires.